It's hard to forget that heartbreaking moment when Cody Brown, the once beloved patriarch of the sister wives family, finally said, I want them out. The words were like a dagger, cutting through years of togetherness, loyalty, and familial love. You could practically hear the weight of that sentence echo through the room, a devastating turning point where it was no longer about love, support, or even the idea of family. It was about power, control, and betrayal. When the Brown family first appeared on our screens, we watched them navigate life as a polygamous family, proud in their unity, sharing everything homes, holidays, love, and the dream of building a life together. But as the years went on, cracks began to show. What was once a solid foundation of shared values and dreams slowly crumbled under the pressure of Cody's need for control and his increasing favoritism toward Robin. The wives, Meri, Janelle, Christine, and Robin, each faced their own emotional journey, but it was clear. The family was no longer unified. Cody's manipulation, favoritism, and emotional neglect were becoming impossible to ignore, and each of the wives, at different points, found themselves standing at a crossroads. The pain and heartbreak were real, but so was the growing strength in the women who started to realize their worth beyond Cody's reign. Hey everyone, it's Eliva here, and you're watching TLC's Sister Wives Secret. Today, we're diving deep into how the Brown family went from a symbol of unity to a broken, fractured mess, and what the women did to take back their power. Trust me, this one is emotional, and I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an update on the explosive truths behind the Sister Wives drama. When the Brown family first started their journey on Sister Wives, they painted a picture of what many saw as an ideal, unique family dynamic. They weren't just a group of individuals. They were a team, a real, functioning unit. They had shared homes, spent holidays together, and created emotional bonds that seemed unbreakable. Whether it was celebrating birthdays, Thanksgiving, or just those quiet, tender moments of daily life, the Brown family was the definition of togetherness. But things started to shift, and it was the move to Flagstaff that really threw the first big stone into their carefully crafted world. It seemed like a fresh start, a new chapter for the Browns. But in reality, it was the beginning of the end. Flagstaff should have been a place for the family to regroup, start over, and find their footing again, but instead, it was where everything started to unravel. The stress of the relocation, the financial struggles, and the emotional strain of trying to make everything work created deep fractures within the family. And when COVID-19 hit, those cracks widened into canyons. Cody's fear of the virus became his defining focus, and it became clear that he was willing to sacrifice the emotional well-being of his family in order to keep control over the situation. The strict rules he enforced, isolating the family, limiting interaction between the wives, and creating a bubble of fear, only deepened the divide. Instead of bringing them together, the pandemic pushed them further apart. His need to impose strict rules, his paranoia, and his obsessive control over the family's movements created an atmosphere of distrust and frustration. It wasn't just about keeping them safe anymore. It was about keeping everyone under his thumb. And as Cody became more consumed by his fear and his rules, the emotional needs of his wives and children were put on the back burner. His attention shifted more and more toward Robin, his favorite wife and her children, creating an emotional distance between him and the others. The family, once a cohesive unit, now felt fragmented. The wives were isolated, not just physically, but emotionally. They were forced to deal with their pain in silence, unable to lean on each other as they once had. You could see the emotional toll it took on the kids, too, especially those from previous marriages. The absence of a shared, unified family bond left them confused and hurt, and the strain started to show in their behavior and their relationships with Cody. As Cody's favoritism toward Robin became more obvious, the others couldn't help but feel the sting of betrayal. It wasn't just the wives who were suffering. The children, many of whom had known a life of closeness and shared moments, felt the emotional sting too. The shift from the communal family to a more isolated, divided home was not just a structural change, it was deeply emotional, affecting the bonds that had once felt unbreakable. And in those moments, the Brown family would never be the same again. Meri Brown has long been the silent one in the family. the one who chose to stand back, stay in the shadows, and absorb the brunt of much of the emotional turmoil. She had always been the one to shoulder the pain in silence. Whether it was Cody's indifference, the internal family conflicts, or the heartbreaking realization that she was never truly his priority. For years, Mary allowed herself to be the scapegoat, quietly enduring while the other wives came forward with their struggles, their needs, and their frustrations. She was the first wife, the one who set the tone, but somehow she had become the one who got the least attention, the least emotional support. But then came the catfishing scandal in 2015, and that was a turning point. It wasn't just a betrayal by an online stranger, it was a public humiliation. Mary's vulnerability was exposed for all to see, and while she was emotionally wrecked by the situation, she was still expected to stay quiet, to forgive, and to move on as though nothing had happened. But for Mary, it was more than just a scandal, it was a wake up call. This was not the life she had imagined for herself, nor was it the treatment she deserved. Yet even then, she kept silent, buried in shame, believing that remaining the noble wife was somehow the right thing to do. Fast forward to the newest season of Sister Wives, and the woman we see today is no longer the quiet, downtrodden Mary from seasons past. This Mary has had enough. The cracks in her facade are starting to show, and she no longer sees silence as a virtue. It's become a form of submission. For years, she thought that keeping the peace, swallowing her hurt, and making herself small would somehow help hold the family together. But as the years passed, it became clear that silence wasn't noble. It was suffocating her, trapping her in a narrative that didn't belong to her. In her one on one interview, Mary broke her silence in a way she never had before. She spoke with raw honesty about the emotional toll the years of neglect and isolation had taken on her. For the first time in ages, Mary didn't just speak about her feelings, she allowed herself to feel. She acknowledged the pain of being treated like an outsider in her own family, the pain of watching Cody drift further and further away from her. Her words were a powerful declaration of self awareness, as she admitted that, for too long, she had allowed herself to be defined by the family's dysfunction. Mary's decision to speak out was a pivotal moment. She realized that the only way to reclaim her sense of self was to stand up for herself, not just in her relationship with Cody, but within the family dynamic as a whole. The quiet woman who once accepted the role of the martyred wife was now ready to take control of her own narrative. Her choice to stand alone wasn't just about walking away from Cody, it was about reclaiming the power she had given up, the power that had always been hers to begin with. She was no longer a victim of the system. She was a woman who had found her voice, and with that voice, she was beginning to rewrite her own story. Janelle Brown has always been the quiet strategist in the family, never one to make waves or seek the spotlight, but always watching, always planning. While the other wives grappled with their emotions, Janelle had a different approach. She observed, calculated, and carefully considered her options. This wasn't about making impulsive decisions based on emotions or seeking validation from Cody. No, Janelle's strength lay in her ability to think long term, in her quiet determination to survive, and ultimately in her decision to build a life on her own terms. One of the most telling moments of Janelle's journey came when she made a conscious decision to never move her assets under Cody's LLC. While the rest of the family was tying themselves up in Cody's financial structures, Janelle kept her independence intact. She knew that financially separating herself from Cody would protect her and give her the ability to make her own choices should things ever go south. This foresight spoke volumes about her growing sense of independence and her understanding of the precariousness of the family's situation. She didn't trust Cody, and it was becoming clearer that his version of family was no longer aligned with her own vision of security and self reliance. It wasn't until the infamous argument between Janelle and Cody that things really came to a head. That moment, when Janelle finally broke down and told him, "You don't care," was a defining point in her emotional journey. She had been through so much, watching Cody prioritize Robin, seeing the tension between them, all escalate, and realizing that her needs and her feelings had been put on the back burner for far too long. This wasn't just an argument about logistics. It was an emotional release that had been building for years. Janelle, always the calm and collected one, finally snapped. Her words, simple but raw, conveyed everything she had been feeling in the depths of her heart. She wasn't just frustrated with the situation. She was frustrated with Cody's inability to see her, to value her, and to acknowledge the sacrifices she had made over the years. But in that moment of raw honesty, something shifted within Janelle. She realized that her own happiness and fulfillment couldn't be tied to Cody's whims or the shifting dynamics of the family. She had been holding on for so long, trying to keep things together, trying to maintain a sense of unity. But Cody's lack of care was the final blow. For Janelle, the emotional breaking point wasn't just about the argument, it was about realizing that she had been asking for something from Cody that he was never willing or able to give: respect, emotional investment, and partnership. From that moment forward, Janelle began to make her own decisions, carving out space for herself, physically, emotionally, and financially. She bought her own land and took steps to ensure her future was hers to shape. There was no longer any need to cling to a relationship that wasn't working, no reason to rely on someone who had made it clear that he didn't care. Janelle's independence wasn't about spite or rebellion, it was about survival, about finding a path that honored her worth, her needs, and her vision for a future that didn't involve Cody. In her mind, the only way to truly survive this family dynamic was to step out of the toxic cycle and begin building a life without him. And that's exactly what she did. Cody Brown's transformation over the years has been nothing short of astonishing. He started off as the confident patriarch of a family that, in the early seasons of Sister Wives, appeared to be thriving. He was the man who had it all together, or at least that's how he projected himself. The family structure, though unconventional, seemed to be functioning. Cody had 4 wives who loved him, children who looked up to him, and the power to make decisions that affected everyone's lives. He was the center of this vast, complicated universe. But over time, cracks began to show. What once seemed like strength and authority morphed into something far more fragile and ultimately destructive. Cody's downfall didn't come suddenly, though. It began with his refusal to accept responsibility for his actions or the state of his family. Even as his marriages started to fray and his children grew distant, Cody remained locked in a place of denial, unable or unwilling to face the reality that his decisions had led to this unraveling. His wounded pride kept him from acknowledging that he, too, was part of the problem. For Cody, admitting fault meant losing the control he so desperately clung to. And that was a threat he couldn't stomach. As the wives became more independent and began to build their own lives, Cody's grip on his family slipped further. But the worst part wasn't just losing his wives, it was watching his children drift away, one by one. There's something deeply painful about that. These were the children he had raised, nurtured, and believed would support him through thick and thin. But as time went on, it became clear that his relationships with them were changing. They were growing up and starting to form their own opinions about him. And many of them weren't pretty. They were no longer the little kids who blindly followed his every word. They were adults with their own voices, and many of those voices were speaking out against the choices he had made. The weight of this loss, the realization that his children were becoming estranged from him, seemed to hit Cody harder than anything else. And then there was the moment that captured the full extent of Cody's unraveling: his breakdown at Coyote Pass. There he stood, boots in the dirt, eyes red with emotion, facing the reality of what he had lost. It was as if the weight of all his decisions finally crashed down on him in that single, vulnerable moment. This wasn't the proud patriarch who had once led his family with certainty. This was a man who was broken, stripped of the control he had always believed he needed to maintain. As he stood there alone in the desert, you could almost see the crushing realization on his face. He had lost it all. In the midst of this collapse, Cody's conflicting emotions were on full display. He still loved Robin, of course, and it was clear that she was the only one he felt he could count on. But even his love for Robin became twisted. He began to see his relationship with her as both a source of comfort and a form of punishment. In his eyes, loving Robin, Prioritizing her needs and making her the center of his universe was somehow costing him the other wives, his children, and his sense of self. He began to equate his love for her with a kind of punishment, as if this one relationship had led to the collapse of everything else. It's a difficult place to be, loving someone so intensely, but feeling that love is the very thing that has caused you to lose everything else in your life. Cody's pride, which had once been so strong, now seemed like a fragile shell, barely holding together the wreckage of his family. His emotions were tangled: resentment, fear, guilt, and confusion, all battling for dominance in his mind. And as his family pulled away, so too did his sense of self, until all that remained was the broken man standing in the dirt, staring at the ruins of what he had once believed was a perfect life. For so long, the women of the Brown family endured a quiet sacrifice that polygamy demanded of them. They were expected to exist within a mold that required them to suppress their voices, their desires, and even their emotional needs. Their role was clear. They were wives, mothers, and caretakers, constantly working to maintain the peace, preserve the family structure, and keep Cody happy. But in doing so, they often lost sight of themselves. The emotional price of that sacrifice was high: years of quiet suffering, unspoken resentment, and the gradual erosion of their identities. Yet, in choosing to break free from that mold, each woman proved that freedom, while costly, was worth every painful step. What we've witnessed in the Brown family is a profound journey of healing and self discovery. It's a reminder that control, no matter how cloaked in religious or cultural practices, ultimately stifles growth, love, and happiness. The truth these women uncovered wasn't just about Cody or the polygamous lifestyle, it was about their own power, their own worth. They showed us that silence doesn't protect, it merely shelters dysfunction. They found their voices, and in doing so, they healed. They chose to walk away from what no longer served them, and that act of leaving was, in itself, an act of liberation. As the legacy of Sister Wives continues to unfold, it teaches us that healing doesn't always come in tidy packages. It's messy, painful, and sometimes requires an unbearable amount of courage. But the reward is real. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think was the real turning point for these women? Was it the move to Flagstaff, Christine's decision to leave, or perhaps something else? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories from TLC's Sister Wives Secret.